Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if stress can actually change your body in ways we can measure over time? Well, this fascinating new study dives into that very question, looking at how stress experienced by specific communities might affect their long-term health. Imagine this: we know that some groups of people face more challenges and discrimination in their daily lives than others. This study asks a really important what-if question: what happens to their bodies? Specifically a stress hormone called cortisol, when they endure these ongoing stressors. And can this lead to mental health issues like depression and anxiety? The researchers are looking at people who identify as part of the LGBTQ community, which they call sexually and gender diverse, or SGD people. They're interested in something called minority stress. What is that? Think of it as the extra stress that comes from being part of a group that is often treated differently or unfairly. This can include things like experiencing discrimination, worrying about being rejected, hiding who you are, or even starting to believe negative things about yourself because of how your group is sometimes viewed. So, the big question here is, does this minority stress actually change the body stress response system in the long run? And is that pathway linked to depression and anxiety? Now, normally when people think of stress hormones, they might think of a quick burst of energy. But the researchers here are looking at something more like a long-term gauge of stress. They're using hair cortisol. Think about hair growth. It is like a clock. And as it grows, any stress hormone circulating in your body get incorporated into the hair. So by analyzing a small piece of hair, scientists can get an idea of your average cortisol levels over the past month. It's a really cool way to see the lingering effects of stress, without having to constantly collect saliva or blood samples, and it is not affected by things like the time of day you might take a sample. They're using a really advanced method to measure this, the gold standard, to make sure their results are as accurate as possible. To figure this out, they gathered a group of people. Some were part of the SGD community, and they also recruited a comparison group of cisgender heterosexual people who were similar in age and body mass index. Everyone filled out surveys about their mental health, specifically looking at depression and anxiety symptoms, and also about their experiences with minority stress. And, of course, they all collected a hair sample. They used well-established questionnaires to measure depression and anxiety, things like the PHQ-9, which asks about how often you fell down, or the GAD-7 for anxiety symptoms. These are standard tools that help quantify how people are feeling. For minority stress, they broke it down into different parts. They asked about facing discrimination or violence, whether people expected rejection, if they felt they had to hide parts of themselves, and if they had negative thoughts about their own LGBTQ identity. This multifaceted approach is important because stress isn't just one thing, right? It can come in various forms. Once the hair samples were collected, they were carefully handled and sent off to a lab for analysis. This is where the actual measurement of cortisol happens. Now, when you are dealing with biological data, sometimes you get unusual numbers. The researchers had to deal with these outliers, or really extreme values, to make sure they didn't skew their results. They also did a log transformation on the cortisol data because these kinds of hormone levels often don't follow a perfectly smooth bell-shaped curve. Before diving into the main results, they made sure the two groups, SGD and cis-heterosexual individuals, were similar in other ways, like age, BMI, and lifestyle habits. This is important, so that any differences they find are more likely due to their identity and experiences, rather than other factors. So, what did they find? First off, as expected, people in the SGD group reported more depression than the cis-heterosexual group. This confirms what a lot of other research has shown, that being part of a marginalized group can significantly impact mental well-being. But here is where it gets really interesting. When they looked closer, they found that gender-diverse individuals, a subgroup within the SGD category, had higher anxiety levels. And perhaps surprisingly, this same group of gender-diverse individuals had lower hair cortisol levels. This isn't what you might intuitively expect when thinking about chronic stress, usually. We associate chronic stress with higher cortisol. They also found that for the SGD group overall, the more minority stress they experienced, the higher their levels of depression and anxiety tended to be. This reinforces the idea that these external pressures are directly linked to internal distress. Now, remember that one aspect of minority stress was internalized stigma, meaning negative beliefs about oneself. They found that this internalized stigma was actually linked to higher hair cortisol levels. This is a crucial piece of the puzzle. So while the overall group of gender-diverse people had lower cortisol, this specific type of self, Directed stress was associated with elevated cortisol. What is fascinating is that other forms of minority stress, like experiencing discrimination, expecting rejection, or the act of concealment itself, weren't directly linked to hair cortisol in their model. This suggests that the body's long-term stress response might be more sensitive to certain types of stress than others. Or perhaps the way these stressors manifest physiologically is complex. The big takeaway here, and what makes this study so important, is the finding about lower hair cortisol in gender-diverse individuals. While the researchers acknowledge that their sample of gender-diverse individuals was smaller, this discovery is significant. They suggest that this might be a sign of what is called a downregulation of the stress system after prolonged periods of intense stress. Similar to what is seen in conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder or chronic fatigue and pain, it's like the body, after being constantly on high alert, eventually starts to conserve energy, leading to lower cortisol levels. This gives us a potential biological explanation for some of the health challenges faced by SGD people. It is not just about feeling stressed, it is about how that chronic stress can physically alter bodily systems, potentially increasing the risk for other health problems down the line that are linked to lower cortisol, like metabolic or cardiovascular diseases. Of course, no study is perfect, and the researchers are upfront about their limitations. One point they raise is that their comparison group, the cis heterosexual individuals, were often recruited through connections of the SGD participants. This could mean that the cis heterosexual participants might be more understanding or supportive, potentially softening the differences between the groups or underestimating the impact of minority stress. Another limitation is the study design. Since they measured everything at one point in time, it is hard to say for sure if the stress caused the lower cortisol and depression, or if maybe there is a more complex interplay or even other factors at play. They're showing associations, which are super informative, but proving direct cause and effect would require studies that follow people over longer periods. Despite these limitations, the study has some real strengths. It is groundbreaking in its use of hair cortisol to examine long-term stress responses in the SGD population. This provides a more robust measure than short-term saliva samples. Plus, they use solid measures for mental health and minority stress and had a good sample size. So, what does this all mean for us? This research shines a light on a potential biological pathway through which minority stress can impact health. It highlights that the experiences of SGD individuals, particularly gender-diverse people, are not just psychological but can have tangible physiological effects. The finding of lower cortisol, while counterintuitive at first, suggests a chronic state of stress-induced dysregulation that could predispose individuals to other health conditions. This opens up avenues for future research, of course, but also for interventions. If we can understand how stress impacts the body at this hormonal level, we can think about how to help mitigate those effects. This could involve addressing discrimination at a political level, providing better social support, and developing interventions that foster resilience and potentially even reverse some of these biological markers of stress. It's a reminder that supporting marginalized communities isn't just about social justice. It is about promoting overall health and well-being at a fundamental biological level. What do you think about these findings? Does the idea of long-term stress showing up in hair cortisol surprise you? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.